David, actually, start with you since you brought up the startups. I'm kind of, wondering what sort of startups you're seeing right now. What are the big trends, and what the state we are in right now, where you talk about the integration of AI into connected devices.
Yeah, I think there's a way to answer that question, I guess, in two parts. The first part is the really exciting, sexy part of autonomous vehicles or drones. I'm an investor in personally in one of each of those kinds of companies. And those...
Which ones are those?
One's called Skycatch. It's a commercial drone company, and Cruise Automation is a self-driving car company. Yeah. And they're doing really frontier work around deep learning, computer vision, and you can think, obviously, of the car as a thing that's connected to some broader internet. Ditto drones as they pursue commercial applications in mining, construction, what have you. More broadly, that's where we focus. So we're an enterprise. At least I'm an enterprise-focused investor, and so you're seeing applications in industrial control as well, wiring up robots to communicate with each other. Obviously, you also see the broader enterprise, the selling to enterprises to interpret large-scale consumer data, whether that be population health and healthcare, or collecting agricultural data from sensors in large plots of land. Yeah. So it really, it's hard to answer that question in a singular kind of way. It's just a broad range.
I'm going to look into, this is a broad question, but do you see the applications going in the enterprise space first before consumers, or vice versa?
I think on the consumer side, you're shifting slowly from devices that give you basic measurements. Particularly, I think you've seen that in healthcare, whether it's tracking your movement, trying to estimate calories burned with things like Fitbit. On the enterprise side, I think the value proposition and the need is so strong, whether it's predicting when to harvest or detecting down power line quickly using vision from a drone, that the urge to buy those products and set up the infrastructure to support those is much stronger. So I think that you'll see the light, sort of the weaker version of these devices spread out in the consumer land, and much more intensive, deeply architected and strong technology that infiltrates into the enterprise first. That's at least my perception.
Luca, you're also...
I'm not sure I agree to that.
Disagree.
On the last part of, whether that it is deeply architected part, I guess you spoke well as an investor, but I think the value prop, if you talk about adoption in terms of creating money value, definitely yes. It's very obvious in enterprise, and you see the investment coming in and you get the returns. But I think there's so much, facial recognition software, there's gesture control, IoT devices you can change, you can manage your light in your house and all kinds of cool stuff you can do. It's just in early stages, it's exploding, and there's going to be some killer app that's going to take off. I mean, there's so many of them today, but some killer app, once it takes off, it's just going to be a blast, and then maybe it will find a home back in enterprise in some other form. So I think there's enough room in.
Yeah, I've always wondered, that's the same thing with the Apple Watch and the wearables, is that we don't have the killer app. What was the killer app for mobile? What killer app are we waiting for? I don't know if in IoT is we don't know what it is yet.
No, I think with the phones, right? There were so many. I think it sounds boring, but email was a killer app, right? I mean, with the smartphone, though we could do a lot of things. Photos, I think, people went on this binge of taking selfies, and then the smartphones arrived. So I do believe there's some killer app that at least that creates the buzz, that kind of gets the mind share of people to scale more. And then more investment has to come in to logically drive it into various different industries.
Sure. Luca?
I think the killer app is autonomy. I'm not going to talk more about tomorrow, right? So first of all, I think we are in the middle of an AI renaissance. You look at the investment that is happening. This is 14th century Florence in terms of what's happening in there is really changing everything. Deep learning, the competition between the big consumer companies, to answer the question, for talent. It's just people don't even realize how much learning and intelligence there is in the current services that they're using, because they get deployed on the back end. You don't even know when Google now suddenly starts to become more intelligent, kind of investment that they had to do this. And so it's more of an organic growth in there. But then if you really want to see what the killer application is, that's why I'm glad we talked about drones and autonomous vehicles and robotics too. extremely AI intensive, data intensive, connected to the environment. When these will deployed, then people will really realize, oh my God, this is changing everything, right?
Well, to extend your metaphor, maybe beyond, if we're still in 14th century Italy, there are powerful city-states at play here, right? There's Apple, there's Google, IBM. And earlier I was on stage with the chief platform officer from Smart Things and kind of saying, well, what's to prevent, I should have asked this more frankly, but like, are connected homes turning into either an Apple home or a Google home, right? Is there any room for other players here?
Frankly, I would defer to that to people focus more on the consumer side.
Okay.
I think there's the connected home question, to me, frankly, has been a difficult one to answer. I don't think there's any one. I don't think there's any one application that constitutes a connected home, and I don't see any one vendor with a lock on what that platform could be. People have talked about the TV as one, some kind of thermostat as a hub to connect other devices,
or like the Amazon Echo too, I guess.
Amazon Echo.
Right.
I would actually defer my non-consumer focus to the rest of the panel on that question. Yeah.
Luca, do you have thoughts on kind of
I have an opinion about that. So I think, besides the autonomous system part, I think it's kind of obvious what's happening, right? If you look at what Kwok just presented, when you introduce deep learning and then the more data and the more CPU you make and the better the system works, right? Mm-hmm. Point number one. So, you want to try to gather as much data as possible. That's why the battle is really in between, data intensive company like, Google, Facebook and all of that. And then you need to have the talent in the background to, tune and come up with a new algorithm. And once you do these, 5 years from now, somebody's services will be, so much better than somebody else's services just because they had so much more data and so much more knowledge and develop those, intelligent, predictive, blah, blah, blah. Hopefully, they'll also do a good user experience once they deploy it. And then what is consumer gonna do? Buy like, device that provides you some crappy service or buy the other one? It's kind of obvious, right? Mm-hmm. So
yeah, what is, so do you have some opinions about this? What does a good UX look like? What's the, when we're talking about, I guess I should keep focusing on the connected home because it's the most,
that's
the
most fragmented one and touches the consumer, so it's
right.
fine.
And the one that faces consumers the most,
yeah.
right? Like how do you think about that human-computer interaction?
So I have this, one of the sections I thought that was unique in my book was about the customer experience for an IoT, because people talk of IoT and they talk of it as a device, and so it feels like you can touch it, it's a piece of hardware. And so it feels like if anybody who's building this, be it a big company or Smart Things or anybody, they think if they make a device and a good industrial design of it is what they're focusing on. Finally, it has to come back, and then it's so fragmented because then it sends notifications, there's app interface to it. So going to your connected home example, if there are 10 devices in my home and I have to download and I have to have 10 different apps to manage it, and so when I leave my home, I want my thermostat to know that I've switched off. I have to do that with 2 different apps. I turn off with my alarm, and then I have to turn off my Nest to back to away for 2 things.
Right.
And so that's not a sustainable thing. That's kind of in an early adopter stage. So somebody has to create an experience, and there will be entrepreneurs, and there are entrepreneurs working on it to create layers on it. And today there are fragmented 4 or 5 open standards with fragmented set of 5 or 10 players in each of them. And there will be a layer on top of it that will create an awesome user experience that I'll just be addicted to it. Then I won't care whether it is Apple or whether it is Google or whether they're, they're finding information about me and they know too much about me.
You won't care. Average consumers won't care.
I mean, when I say I'm talking about the average consumer, I do care a lot. But I'm talking about the average consumer would be addicted to the user experience. Today, if you look at how much we are tethered to our phone and how much our phone tracks us and knows about us, if they had stopped and said in the beginning, it's going to snoop around, it's going to do this to you, you're never going to be away from your phone, and you wake up and you're going to find your phone, you go to bed and it's going to be with you, and it knows more about you than you know about yourself, we would have this discussion. But it was fed to us in this nice, slick UI with a whole bunch of apps arriving. So I think the layer of apps that arrived is like the different devices in connected space today. And to David's point, I think Luca's point, I think service is very important. Finally, somebody gives a service on top of it so that you can actually pay for the addicted service and it doesn't run out of battery and you don't have to worry about all the things, then that one is going to win.
Yeah, when the hell is AI going to solve the battery problem, right? That's, I mean, but I mean, also, I guess, there is, we talk a lot about software and machine learning, right? But there are also some hardware problems, right? There's like a lot of like the GPUs that need to process the data for connected cars, for drones, right? I mean, where are we in the evolution of where hardware is and where it needs to be?
Yeah, I mean, you're seeing IBM, Qualcomm, and a bunch of others release chipsets designed to make that kind of analysis easier.
Yeah.
My contention would be a lot of that's probably still going to be offloaded to the cloud in some sense. There are use cases, for example, a car driving at 60 or 70 miles per hour, it doesn't really have the time to call back home if it wants to serve up a recommendation on where to turn if you're hungry, right? So I think there are certain cases where just what I see people do now is just throw GPUs at the problem.
Yeah.
I think, but broadly though, for most sensor nets, I think that, especially in enterprise use cases, again, is what I would speak to, the latency for some of these decisions, or the time, the SLA for the time of some of these decisions, I don't think is going to be so drastic that you're going to have to push a lot of the compute to the actual sensor nodes. So the offload will happen, which in a way eases the burden and doesn't and solves some of the problem around battery and lifetime, just because you're not running as many cycles and you're not using as much of it.
Sure. Quick question about like methodology. I mean, Quack and Google certainly like a firm believer in deep learning, but my basic like elementary understanding is there are different. That's not the only one, right? There are different methods in artificial intelligence and machine learning. Are there others that look like they're more applicable to different devices and different industries?
Yeah.
I mean, deep learning is just a name now, right? I mean, of course, when Jeff Hinton and the Toronto team came, yes, or IoT, sorry.
Yeah.
But like, when they came up with deep learning, it was one specific thing, convolutional neural networks plus, whatever, dropout. But now, again, it's a renaissance, right? Is, trying to get like all these PhDs into your lab to, come up with the latest algorithm, call them deep learning because it's easy to get funding for that. And because it does work, right? So let's just say it's the current wave of AI, right? But it is working, right? It is not, we're not inventing anything here. It's just that at the scale of data and CPU that we have, we do get those kind of results, and that is transformational. Mm-hmm. So.
Well, no. So to your question on whether there are different approaches, yes, of course. I think deep learning, so far as it has been demonstrated, is incredibly and uncannily effective with image and speech recognition and understanding. People are applying this to text sequences now, so you're, as well as the kind of data that you might throw off and that a train might throw off for maintenance signals about its state. So there are a bunch of problems in trying to adapt these large neural networks to those use cases. Mm-hmm. But frankly, I think if you ask if you look at a bunch of different enterprises and the way they use these things, in many ways, something as simple as logistic regression can solve a lot of what you need. Overcomplicating the problem when it doesn't need to have that complication just adds way too much complexity. And I think at the same time, the interface to interacting with deep learning systems is at the moment still too complicated for most people. A bunch of libraries are popping up to try and simplify that process.
Right. That would be what TensorFlow, what is my understanding, right? That's kind of what it's meant to accelerate. I mean,
TensorFlow is a broad data flow language to build these kind of pipelines, but I think just even there are a number of libraries that try to make it easy to design networks, design neural networks, if you're not someone who understands, matrix algebra and how that might specifically get expressed in a neural network, or any of the other really incredibly difficult complexities of those things. So in as powerful as deep learning can be, in many cases it's overshooting the goal. And I think even with even with an IoT case as simple as how do you collect population level health fitness data from trackers, or medication adherence or compliance, those things don't require, to analyze that data is not the problem. And in fact, I would argue in many of these cases around Internet of Things and data sensors. It's just getting the data,
Collecting.
cleaning it, and making it available to the right stakeholders. That's where the business problem is.
Sure.
When we hear about the different kind of algorithms,
Yeah.
we hear from the big companies, right? And it's also theoretically these are all possible, and this is what we have used, and now go use it. Is what we are hearing. That's the sexy stories, right?
Yeah.
And
Because they just want to be
Right?
universities, but they just have ad
yeah,
businesses.
but there are many startups who are actually applying deep learning. They don't have the time or bandwidth to stop and think they are doing something unique or awesome, but they're trying to solve for specific problems. So there's one company in Germany which makes a glove for enterprise for manufacturing process called ProGlove.
Okay.
And so instead of the worker actually like scanning RFID one at a time and then doing certain steps, they wear this glove, and inside that, on top of it is this RFID thing. It connects, and to that wearable, which is kind of the enterprise wearable tied to it, it collects the data, and the worker keeps doing stuff. But it actually checks whether they're supposed to do 4 different movements to make that part, whether it is done, and it checks for quality errors. Yeah. And it takes the data and it processes it. And it does, it makes sure that it follows compliance, it's quality. It sounds boring, it doesn't make headlines as a story, but that company is making progress, right?
Companies,
so there's a bunch of stuff.
It's our fault for like drawing the sexy companies and not the enterprise ones. But that's the case for the enterprise, right? And that's, that with Google Glass, right? Google Glass probably has better life as an enterprise application than it does, unless we have the second version coming out. But I don't think anyone out here is wearing one, right? But you make the case there for the argument that we're going to see much more traction in the enterprise world. I'm curious about, David, your point about wearables, like with the issue there, how much of it is collecting data? Is the obstacle regulatory? Is the obstacle just like getting people to actually like use the devices? How many of us here are wearing a wearable something, right?
No. In a healthcare context specifically, or?
Sure, right, isn't that kind of the big, you talk to like Jawbone and Fitbit, they're like, we're not wearable companies, we're data companies, right?
Well, yeah,
but the only reason that they can be data companies is they actually have people wearing their devices.
Yeah, a lot of people like to claim that they're data companies when they could be better described as something else. But if the question is what is stopping a lot of people wearing sensor nodes to give the world useful data, I think it's just, again, I can't speak to the consumer trends, but I personally don't find that much utility in most of those devices.
Yeah.
I hope someday that they become cheap and effective enough at measuring what I care about that I actually go and use them. From a healthcare perspective, I think actually population level health data, if you can tie it to climate data, if you can tie it to epidemiological data, if you can connect it with EMRs, electronic medical record data at large scale, you can probably start to build really useful things.
Right.
And so the regulatory aspect is not as complicated as, again, as collecting the data and getting the actual businesses to work together. So just in healthcare specifically, the fact that in order to move healthcare data from point A to point B, you need to follow a very complex set of guidelines called HIPAA. It would be a wonderful world if Epic and Cerner, two of the largest EMRs in the space, didn't actively try and block people from interoperating with their devices. And if that were the case, and anybody could put on a device that, a smart glucometer, or, for diabetics, or a blood pressure cuff that phone home with your results, or even the ARIA scale, I think, from Fitbit that can send data back about your weight to some EMR, you could actually, I think, really make meaningful population-level healthcare decisions.
Right.
Even of course, at the individual level.
This sounds like standardization still.
Standardization and bad incentives.
Yeah.
But wearables, I actually usually wear the Basis, it's from Intel. It's a watch.
Okay.
I don't wear it on an average day because I don't care about tracking my steps, which it does. Yeah. But it tracks my sleep.
Yeah.
And I like the pattern of how much REM sleep I had, and tell my kid you didn't let me sleep type of thing. I find that interesting.
It just happened, I think, an hour ago. Fossil just acquired Misfits, that wearables company, like $250 million. So still, the space is heating up. I want to be sensitive to like the time for